Welcome to the Family Tree Magazine podcast. This is the show from America's #1 genealogy magazine. I'm Andrew Cook, editor of Family Tree Magazine. In this episode, we'll continue our coverage of America's 250th anniversary by exploring the website of one of the country's oldest lineage societies, the Daughters of the American Revolution. The society, founded in 1890 and having some 190,000 current members, has made many of the records and applications that it's collected across decades available through its website. That Genealogical Research System, or GRS, makes an excellent resource for those who are interested in Revolutionary War era ancestors, whether or not they actually plan to apply to the DAR. I've asked our digital editor, Katharine Andrew, to join us today to talk about the GRS. She's written an article on the subject for FamilyTreeMagazine.com, and by the way, is a DAR member herself. Hey there, Katharine.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So DAR is one of the better known lineage societies, but with that said, can you remind us what the DAR is and who's eligible to join?
Yes, so the DAR is the Daughters of the American Revolution. It's one of the oldest genealogy societies in the country, well, lineage societies, but besides being a lineage society, they also do historic preservation work and also educational work as well. And what they are, in essence, is a lineage society. So members are descendants of approved ancestors. And they have chapters across the country that make up the whole DAR. But to be a member, you have to prove descendancy from someone who is a patriot in the Revolutionary War or who aided the side of what would become America. So even if they didn't fight in the war, they're still labeled as a patriot ancestor. And that means if they gave money or supplies willingly to the cause of the American Revolution on the Patriots side, then proving that descent, you can become a member of the DAR.
So not just the military contribution, like you said, it could be a field nurse, somebody who was a courier for the Patriot side. Trying to broaden that definition of patriot as somebody who just supported American independence earlier. I think there's a misconception that you have to, be a descendant of someone who literally fought in George Washington's army or in a militia somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So it's anyone who contributed, really, and who helped.
What is the GRS? I know it stands for Genealogical Research System, but it's this database of databases that they have on their website. How can it help people, even those who aren't interested or eligible in applying to become a member of DAR?
So the DAR's genealogical research system, as you said, is sort of like a database of databases. But what it really is it's not just one database. There's interconnected databases, but it's really um, several tools that draw out of DAR membership applications, um, the extensive library collections that the DAR has, as well as numerous volunteer indexing projects. So there's, at its core, there's an ancestor database, a membership or a member database, a descendants database, and then there's the database of the Genealogical Records Committee, the GRC. Lots of abbreviations here. um, and that database is basically a whole research side of the inner workings of the DAR. And then there's a Revolutionary War database and also a Bibles database that are all interconnected within the full GRS system. Now,
We genealogists do love a good acronym or some good alphabet soup, as our
we
faculty advisor at our newspaper liked to say in college. So these
we
are
definitely do.
documents that applicants supplied in order to bolster their odds here to prove their case that they're related to one of these patriot ancestors. What kind of records made up those application files?
So the application files themselves are the records that make up the ancestor database. So it's the actual applications. Now, in those files, you will find the records likely, or at least citations to records that support the evidence that this person applying for membership descended from this person who descended from this person who descended from, you know, the patriot ancestor, right? It's really a genealogical direct family tree from the patriot ancestor to that person through proven records. And that's what makes up an application. Within those applications, though, you will find source like files, copies of birth certificates or wills, that sort of thing, that helped with that application. But the applications themselves are what is in these databases, if that makes sense.
And that's the descendant database, right? Showing the connection between, well, not a modern
Mhm.
day applicant, but
Yeah.
somebody who's applied to be in DAR over the last 130 years,
Yes.
and the really the genealogy work that they did. So sort of be like kicking over an ancestry.com family tree today, a well-sourced one at that, but showing the connection between generations, not just information about that qualifying ancestor.
Yes. So the descendants database does show that like direct line. The ancestors database shows the patriot ancestor going to any number of descendants within that descendants database. So you can sort of start to see how these are all really interconnected databases.
Right in there. So if you were to look in the descendant database for somebody because you knew you had a connection to a DAR member, say,
Hmm.
the ancestor, the qualifying ancestor would be cross-referenced in that ancestor database. That's what you mean when
Yeah. And
when you
vice
say they're
versa.
connected, right? Yeah,
And
yeah,
vice
and vice
versa.
versa.
Yeah.
And that could be interesting too if you were trying to find people who are alive today or in the recent past, descendants of um, other descendants of your ancestor down those collateral lines.
Yeah. So the one caveat to that is the DAR does take their current members, their privacy very seriously. So for me, because I'm a little bit younger, the my generation, my parents' generation, and my grandparents' generation are all blocked out, privacy restricted in their database. But if it's someone who joined in like the 1920s, you might be able to find their actual name attached to their application. Um,
So
yeah.
their names, so for those recent generations, if you were to find their application files, their actual names would be redacted.
Yes. So all current members of the DAR, their names are redacted from those files.
So you hinted at this already, but maybe that privacy, while important, can also be sort of a drawback. What are some of the other drawbacks of the GRS?
So the major drawback for the GRS is you would think, oh, it's the Daughters of the American Revolution. It's going to have every single person who ever was a patriot in the American Revolution or contributed to the cause in the American Revolution recorded in these databases. That is not true. You can have an ancestor and they could not be recorded in any of these databases because nobody who descended from them ever applied to as a member, right? So these are the major drawback is these are records of all of the known ancestors of people who were DAR members or are DAR members who joined this specific lineage organization. It's not a record, it's not records of every single person who contributed to the American side of the American Revolution.
So to put it another way, um, if there was a patriot who sort of died out, their line didn't continue, they wouldn't be reflected there. Um, if they didn't have a descendant, say, who was living before 1890 for sure, but maybe even after that.
Yeah, exactly. And there are many patriots who've, even in the past couple decades, nobody applied underneath them, but then a new member pops up proving their lineage, and so now they're added into the system. So it's not like
It
a
makes me
complete record.
it makes me think of there's a similar society for Mayflower descendants,
Hmm.
and there were only so many people on the Mayflower, so it's a much smaller sample size. But right, it is interesting to see. Okay, well, this person died, so they didn't have any descendants, but whatever 40% of the people who apply to this
Hmm.
society all descend from the same person because they were maybe more prolific, say,
Hmm.
or that um, more engaged in genealogy, even. So it's not comprehensive as people might expect it to be. It's not like going to Fold 3 and expecting to find a service record
Hmm.
for any soldier. It's less comprehensive that way.
Yeah,
These
it's
are
it's
also user submitted family histories, though, right? That this is somebody doing their own research and it's been vetted by someone at the DAR, but anytime you dig back, especially decades and decades ago, into family histories, you do have to approach it with some skepticism, right?
so yes and no. So many years ago, that would be a yes. You would have to approach these with skepticism. Um, in recent years, especially recent few decades, most DAR chapters, when they're reviewing membership applications, they have at least one person or an entire committee called the genealogy committee, depending on the chapter, how it's called. And they will go through every single piece of evidence and help a new applicant through the entire process. And if they're missing documents, they'll go and try and find them, that sort of thing. So, at least when I was applying, when maybe a decade and a half ago, I had someone basically holding my hand through the whole process and being like, "No, we can approve this because of all of this evidence." And so that's something now that they do. If we go back to maybe the 1910s, 1920s, that's when we get those more skeptical applications. And a lot of those skeptical applications, they are noted in bright bolded red letters within each database that, there's not enough evidence or that this has been disproven, that sort of thing. So they've been taking steps to make sure that things are more, correct, and that there's evidence for the lineages.
They're sort of like genealogy mythbusters.
A
They're going
little
to
bit,
validate
yeah.
some lines, and that's good that somebody is at least processing that. The dark side of genealogy history has been, well, I want to prove that my ancestors were the right kind of ancestors.
Hmm.
So, especially with organizations that may have been seen as more elite or desirable to be a part of, like DAR.
Hmm.
So that someone is not just applying that critical eye to applications as they come in, but also noting inconsistencies or discrepancies and mistakes or cover-ups
Yes.
farther up the chain for older already approved applications,
Yeah,
say.
exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience applying for DAR? You mentioned that it's through a chapter. There are chapters, I imagine, around the country, and all of the records flow into the GRS, I would think.
Hmm. Yeah, so my experience applying for the DAR might be a little bit different because I was so young. um I was maybe a freshman in college, but I was obviously very interested in genealogy and figured out there was a chapter nearby. Um, so the way that I applied was I just contacted them and asked, "Hey, I have this ancestor. I think this qualifies. Can I apply?" And then that launched the application process, which was I gathered everything that I had and I sent it to the person who was the genealogist on my chapter's side. and they helped me put together the application, and then that application had to be approved by my that chapter, and then also believe it might have had to be been approved by a state chapter, but don't quote me on that. And then it had to be approved by the national chapter, the full DAR. Um, so that's when that application, once it's approved by them, that's when it gets put into the database, or it gets into the pipeline to eventually be put into the database. Yeah.
And if someone's interested in applying, they don't
Mhm.
need to take their documentation back to the 1770s, right? They can sort of attach to a known descendant or even a known member. Say if you had a mother, a grandmother who was part of DAR, the process of getting validated is a lot simpler.
Yeah, so it's increasingly becoming a lot simpler, especially if you have other relatives in the DAR. Even if it's an aunt or a cousin, you have to prove, up to a certain point that you're related through a common ancestor. And then that proof can be their application can fill in the blanks with yours. In my case, I think I had to prove up to a third or a fourth great grandparent because my mom and my grandma or nobody were members before I decided to join. Um, but I've had acquaintances who their grandma was a member, or their kids uh, joined as a child of the American Revolution. That's their, young people's organization that works with the Daughters of the American Revolution. Um, so it's a bit more convenient if you've got members in your family tree, or if you share a common ancestor with somebody else who's already in those databases.
You mentioned the children of the American Revolution. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the other
Yes.
very prominent lineage society, the Sons of the American Revolution. If anyone went to the National Genealogical Society conference in 2025 in Louisville, right across the street there is the Sons of the American Revolution's headquarters, and I imagine that process is very similar to what we've been talking about here.
Yeah, from what I know, I believe it's pretty similar. Though the Sons of the American Revolution do have lots of their application files digitized on Ancestry and Family Search. So it's a little bit different, but yeah, still still also a very big organization for this time period.
Going back to the website here, do you have any tips for using the GRS for searching for ancestors or people that you think you might be descended from who qualify
Yeah.
or other qualifying relatives?
So my biggest tip when when you're searching through these databases is that the DAR uses a standardized version of spelling for names. So if you type in Randall, Randol, with an OL, it's going to be searching for Randall as in Randall. And that's just a standardized system so that these nobody no an, a patriot ancestor can't be two people in the system, right? Like a David Randall and a David Randell. Um, because if you go down a few generations, my side of that guy's family spelled it with an OL, but everybody else is spelling it with ALs. And so keeping in mind that the surname and given name spellings are pretty standardized, it might not be the same spelling as your line's spelling. That's just how they have it recorded in the database. So
That's
that,
interesting. So that there's sort of an official version of how that line
mhm,
spelled their name, even if it has morphed over the
yes.
centuries.
Yeah, exactly. So even though I descend from David Randell's daughter, uh, or no, his son, and then into one of his daughters, his son was spelling it with an OL, but his dad, I guess, most of the documents for his other children were spelling it with an ALL. So it's sort of surname research at the same time.
They love to trick us like that.
They really do. And then the other main tip that I have is when you're looking through that ancestor database, um, when you find someone of interest, you'll click into their profile, um, and it will have full record of their service if that's available. So cross-checking that with any other places you can find records, like Fold3 or Family Search, using those dates and the company or regiment number and that sort of thing, but also looking down into the associate applications and supplementals. Because if you look there, that's where you're going to be seeing however many children a person, people, members of the DAR descend from. So you can have just one child that many members descend from, or you can have many children that a few members descend from, and deciding which of those applications you'd like to see. Um, so that's where you'll get into big decisions about how you want to spend your money to view these applications. But paying attention to those names, and also um, seeing if any of those names match people in your family tree as well.
You touched upon another thing that I want to make sure we get to, which is searching the site is free. Viewing
Yes.
the index is free, but you will have to pay a fee to see the original application file or copy of it.
Yes, you do have to pay to see the application files. Originally, I believe you had to send in a check or a money order, and it would get to your email or to your actual post box within a week or two. But now they've made that system almost instantaneous. So you just pay the fee, and then immediately you get access to an application. At least the ones that I've used. Now, I'm sure the newer ones, it might take a little bit for them to be processed, but uh, they'll I tested it with my own application once, and I was able to just pay the little fee and then get the documents in 30 seconds. So at least we don't have to mail things in anymore.
Right? Right. So you mentioned Family Search and Fold3 and Ancestry.com throughout this conversation. What are some other resources that are available for people researching Revolutionary War ancestors and people who lived around that time?
Right. So I do want to point out that the DAR, their database system, it has a few other databases that are extremely useful, even if you're not wanting to apply or just researching around this time period. So that's the Rev War. They spell it, abbreviate it Rev War section. Uh, Less so a database, but section, because there's multiple databases within this database in a database. Um, and so this one has uh, a Patriot Records index project. So you can search through indexes of over, I believe, 500,000 Revolutionary War documents. And then you can also access original images of those documents on the DAR's website. Um, they have a pension index, which now, as we all probably know, is also on Fold3. But this one is older. It's from when volunteers from the DAR used to actually have to visit the the archives and abstract everything on their own. And then they do have a Patriots of Color database. So that's building on work that was previously done in the Forgotten Patriots Project, which went through and researched African American and Native American patriots of the Civil War. And so that's like an addendum to that other research. And it's a newer database that broadens the scope of the project to include Latin American patriots or African African American, Native American, Italian, German, that sort of thing, people who aren't usually looked at when you're researching the American Revolutionary War. And then they also have a Revolutionary War grave marker index too, which is useful. So that's on their website. Now, other websites that I like using are, we've touched on the Sons of the American Revolution, and they've got really good information there. I do like searching through full text search as much as I possibly can. So there are some things from this time period that are now in full text search on Family Search. There are also numerous collections on Ancestry and Fold3, its partner website, that detail the Revolutionary War. So that includes that full collection of pension files that are now on Fold3, which
They made
are,
a splash about that at RootsTech
yeah, it was a
earlier
big
this year too, I
splash.
remember. Hmm.
uh, Big splash because not only are they digitized, but they're also full text search. So if your ancestor was mentioned in somebody else's pension file, then they'll pop up in a full text search, even if it's not their pension file, right? So those are just a few of the other things that I like using when I'm researching this time period.
Yeah, a lot of resources, not just because there's a lot of interest this summer with the 250th anniversary, but because this time period fascinates people. People take a lot of pride in being able to connect to this era. There are a lot of published histories and published volumes of records that you can look at too. And we've
Mm-hmm.
covered that in the magazine a few different times. So in the show notes, we'll link to, we have an article on different websites and on other online resources for Revolutionary War research. And then an article we ran um, earlier this year, I think it was our May June issue, on everyday life in the American Revolution. So not the soldiers, not even necessarily the, the legislators, the representatives to the Continental Congress, but the wives who were still at home, or like you mentioned, the forgotten stories, the American Indian allies, um, African Americans, both free and still enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of different things to look at. And then I'll also be sure to link to your full article, which goes into more detail about each of these databases and how you can search them.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Well, thank you, Katharine. Appreciate you hopping on here. And we'll see. I should mention, too, that you are the chief architect of our free email newsletter. So if any of you are receiving that, we send it 6 times a week. That's all curated by Katharine. It's often her who is writing that little custom note at the top. So it's a worthwhile read. If you're not already subscribed, you can do that on our website. Just a little plug there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me in this month's episode of the Family Tree Magazine podcast. You can find the show notes from this episode and all episodes at familytreemagazine.com/podcast. While on our website, you can also sign up for our free email newsletter where you'll receive free genealogy resources each weekday, including links to new podcast episodes as they're released. Until next time, have fun climbing your family tree.